That's okay. Good morning. So we are all here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I've hit record, so we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, so we're in heaven. Finally, we've made it all the way here. Did you guys have any questions? I know we didn't have any really new reading. Did anyone have any questions before we kind of jump right in?
No, we're all good.
Okay. All right. So we're going to do an introduction. It's going to be very sort of broad, and we're going to fill out the study guide pages on pages 80 and 81. And these are really, it talks about some themes going forward in Paradiso, things that we just kind of need to pay attention to. And then the actual structure, because we know that every part of Dante's, creation has an architecture to it. It has an actual geography to it, so he's built this cathedral of words in the Divine Comedy, but even within each canticle or canticle, he's got, this geography. And of course, in the Inferno, we went down, 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 down in circles, always in one direction. Mount Purgatory, we emerge and we then have to climb in the opposite direction. So now we've kind of emerged, and you're probably wondering, how on earth do you move through heaven? How would heaven be structured architecturally? Well, as we know, Dante, the author, has had a very in-depth knowledge of astronomy. He constantly talks about the constellations. He talks about the movements of the planets, the movements of the stars. And a lot of that, the reason I don't really get into it is because first of all, it's not incredibly relevant because I try to always give an overview of where we are chronologically. That's really the important time. Where are we in the day? Where are we in, within the scheme of Easter week, Holy Week, Easter week. And now also, we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of the fact that the system of astronomy that Dante ascribed to was a since disproved system, right? He wasn't dealing or coming from the perspective of a heliocentric astronomical system like we know exists now, and that is, accepted and proven and all of this stuff. He was going off of the accepted astronomical, I'm going to get this word right one of these decades, astronomical system of the time. It was the accepted system, and it is the Ptolemaic system. So Claudius Ptolemy, he was born in Egypt, and he was born around 100 AD, and this is Egypt as part of the Roman Empire. So he was a Roman citizen. He was a mathematician, he was a geographer, a cartographer, an astronomer. He wrote a lot. And his book, Amalgast, or his manuscript, outlined his view of the system, right? The planetary system. I don't call it the solar system because it was actually geocentric. So meaning that the Earth was at the center of his system. It was very complex. And he mapped out, the movement of the stars. He could absolutely, within his system, they could trace the movement of the stars, trace the movement of planetary objects, the planets, or planetary bodies like the planets. And it was very believable, right? He had it all figured out. And it actually, that manuscript is the only ancient astronomical manuscript that survived. Of course, the whole burning of the library in Alexandria didn't help anything. But yeah, so Almagest is what it is. And it is the only surviving ancient astronomical manuscript. Super interesting. But so it's basically a system where Earth is in the center. And Dante, we've referred to this a couple of times. There's a sphere of air directly around the Earth, right? You basically have Earth, then you have air, and then you have fire on the outside, the circle of fire on the outside of it. So that would be the highest level or the highest sphere of, I guess, earthly existence, right? That would be sort of the atmosphere, the outer atmosphere, as what we know as the atmosphere. And the Ptolemaic system is these concentric circles around the Earth, sort of like the solar system with the sun at the middle is concentric circle-ish kind of orbits of the planets. This is what Ptolemy had kind of constructed as well. So each sphere it kind of goes around the Earth, right? And then within that, you have a planetary body, starting with the moon, of course, because the moon is the closest to the Earth, and it kind of moves on its own track, kind of within that sphere. What do you call the sphere? So, and out and out and out and out we go. So the way I always think about this is, when we talk about going, in true, even C.S. Lewis style, the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, onwards and upwards. And so that's what we do. We go onward, we go upward, we go outward is really what we're doing. And if you think about the way that we travel through these spheres, and our ultimate destination is God himself. So we start very small, we start on Earth within ourselves, we move out, we move out, we move out, and then we move into eventually infinity, which is God. It's really beautiful. I mean, thinking about it that way, in that structure. So, and within each sphere exist, this is where it gets tricky for me to kind of talk about it, because I say, well, these certain souls are within these spheres, but really their true existence is at the throne of God. I mean, all souls in heaven are basically sitting at the feet of God, right? But where we see them, where we meet them, where their images are, they're in these certain spheres. And in each sphere, just like in Purgatorio, just like Inferno, like souls are with like souls. So they're grouped in groups of categories, and we will talk about the kind of how they're broken down. So just to let you know, that's geographically how we'll do. And we talk about it, it's I'll say things like, we're moving to the next sphere, we're moving to the next planet, we're moving to the next level. It's all synonymous. It all means the same thing. It's all interchangeable. We're moving to the next heaven, because that's how he also denotes it. The next heaven, the second heaven, the third heaven. You've heard of that show, The Seventh Heaven. This is all referenced here. So, so that is the model, the Ptolemaic model of the universe. And so let's just kind of move right into it. So this is page 80 in the study guide. We're going to talk just about the physical structure. I kind of gave you the breakdown of the Ptolemaic system. So number 1 says the physical structure of the Paradiso is the 9 concentric circles of the Ptolemaic heavens. So 9 concentric circles, starting with the sphere of the moon and going out. And then it's of the Ptolemaic heavens, or you could say the Ptolemaic spheres, or however you want to say it. But the important thing to understand is that this was the accepted cosmology. This was the theory that we had at that time on the Earth, and it was the accepted version of it. It's not like Dante was, and I have to clarify this all the time, because Catholics specifically really have gotten a bad rap unjustly for fighting, Galileo and all this stuff. And it was never about the science of it, right? It was about obedience. Okay. So it was never about like, Galileo, you're just wrong. It was about obedience. And, can you please just let us look this over before you start broadcasting this, new scientific fact that you so-called, proved or disproved or whatever. So I just want to make sure that we understand that this isn't something time-wise that, Catholics were clinging to this idea of the Ptolemaic heavens. No, this was the idea of heavens. This was the scientific belief. And nobody was clinging to anything at this point, okay? So Ptolemaic heavens. Number 2, the narrative follows the ascent, up, 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 from heaven to heaven, and an account is given of the blessed spirits, and I say souls or spirits, and these of course are all blessed. These are all sanctified souls. They are all in heaven. They're saved. They're in their ultimate eternal destination. An account is given of the blessed spirits who inhabit each sphere. Dante takes advantage of the fact that these souls are all truth in God and asks them many questions. So a couple of themes that we're going to encounter. The first one I think I've referenced over and over again, but that we're really going to get the kind of brute force of it in Paradiso, is light. Always lighter, always brighter. Color is a big theme here, but really light. And if you think about what we've already encountered with angels, being so bright, even in the Inferno, we saw this bright light walking toward the gates of Dis. That was an angel. And then in Purgatorio, same thing. We see this bright light approaching on the beach. Of course, you can barely look at it. It's an angel. Every heavenly body, every divine being is so bright that Dante can't even look really at them. The same thing with Beatrice. She's so incredibly bright. And it's not, if we think about it, we have to think about even kind of some of the more philosophical logic discussions that he's had about how do babies go bad, basically. This little baby with this soul put in by God, how does that go bad? And he talks then about God's got this seed, this kernel of creation that he puts in the soul, and then basically leaves it to imbue his light, and it's only free will that kind of dulls that light and does different things, distorts the light. So again, we reach this thematic point where all of these blessed souls, Beatrice included, angels included, they are imbued with the light of God. God is all good. He's pure light. He's pure good. He's totally pure truth. All of these things, and he is inside of all of these souls. His goodness is in all of these souls, and there's nothing to distort that. There's nothing to dim that light in these souls. So they are lit from within. You can think about it that way, lit from within, and their sanctity allows God's light to show through them. So it gets brighter and brighter and brighter as we move onward and upward toward God himself, to God's presence himself. And the way that we, just like in every other kind of situation that we found ourselves in, Inferno, Paradiso, Inferno, we started with sort of lightweight sins and got to the really bad sins at the worst sin at the bottom. It's going to be the same thing, but sort of, it's the same thing in Paradiso. We start with great people. I mean, everybody in heaven deserves to be there. They're pure, right? They're wonderful, blessed spirits. But in the beginning, in the first three spheres, the first three kind of types that we meet, they did a really good job. They did great, but there was something about the way that they lived, that their virtue was not entirely perfect. It was tempered just a little bit. Maybe, for instance, we'll take the first heaven of the moon, the inconstant. So these are people who were, they took vows, to holy life or to whatever, and for whatever reason, the vow got broken. And it wasn't even always because of them. They were forced, they took the vow, and went to the nunnery, to the cloistered life, and then their brother came and stole them from the convent and made them marry some guy. Okay, so again, this wasn't actually this lady's fault that this happened. This was what happened to her. So she was a vow breaker. She also was, her intent was to unite her will with God. So just an example of, and we will see this, several times. We'll talk about in detail some of the examples, but this is what I'm talking about. You can absolutely have the best intentions, and unite your will with God, but something happens externally to almost, break that, or make it less pure, make it imperfect. So that's just an example of kind of how we'll see. But as we move up into the heavens, these are greater and greater examples of sanctity, greater and greater examples of pure devotion to God, pure unity with God's will. That's another theme that we're just going to keep hammering home. Uniting your will with God, creating a path in your life the whole way, all the way there, that is your main purpose, because as humans, we have all sorts of things we want to do. But as we've already talked about in detail, sometimes the things we want to do are not the things that God wants us to do, right? They don't actually bring us closer to unity with God's will. So that's kind of how the souls in paradise are categorized. So we get to meet all kinds of cool people, famous people, doctors of the church, philosophers, all kinds of saints. It's going to be really interesting. So 3 here on page 80, it says the work ends in God himself is the answer there. So this whole time, almost like Purgatorio, we were waiting and waiting and waiting to meet Beatrice. Well, now we're going to wait and wait and wait to meet God himself, to see him, to stand in his presence. And so we do that alongside Dante in the very end. So moving on to the next section, reminder of the literal and allegorical purposes of the work. We haven't really hit on this a whole lot, not in a while anyway. So remember, there's 2 levels to this allegory. So, or to the story itself. So the first one is the literal level, okay? And he is literally talking about, Dante, the author, is literally talking about the state of the soul after death. So what happens to your soul when you die? What happens in the afterlife? Same theme all the way through. You go to hell, you go to purgatory, or you end up in paradise. So the state of the soul after death is the literal purpose of the work. The allegorical purpose is how man, according to his merits or demerits, in the exercise of his free will, justly deserves either reward or punishment. So you could even shorten this and say he gets what he deserves. Man, woman, human, we get what we deserve. Why? Because God is just, and creation cannot exist without that justice. It can't exist without a perfect balance, everything going the way that it should go. This is why Christ had to die on the cross. Somebody had to pay that price. Somebody had to step up and pay the ultimate price. And either each one of us was going to pay it, or God himself had to give his life to pay the price for the sin in the garden. So man gets what he deserves because of actions of his free will, whether good or bad. He gets reward or punishment. So then we're going to review a little bit about the role of Beatrice. This is still on page 80. Number 1 says, what Dante tells us about Beatrice is that in real life, she and her love for Dante were the medium of his moral reform and religious salvation. Moral reform and religious salvation. So this is huge. I mean, when you really sit and ponder the role that Beatrice had in Dante's life, it is extreme. It's very humbling to think that any person could have that impact on any other person. So, I mean, and you may have people like this in your life, or a person in your life who you have met that maybe it's a priest, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's one of your parents, maybe it's a brother or sister who drives you to be better, right? This is somebody who just by, their example, or perhaps by their encouragement or advice has, makes you a better person, makes you think about things that you do before you do them, or makes you come to the realization that something you've done is not in unity with God's will. Maybe you need to reform your morality or that part of your moral judgment. And then, of course, that naturally leads to this aspect of religious salvation. So just like we saw with Dante and Beatrice, we couldn't wait to meet her. This woman is just phenomenal. What a great person, and he's talked about her, and he's just had this encouragement of her, kind of like her vision, driving him through hell, driving him up purgatory. And then, we meet her, and she's so mean to him. She's so mean to him, and it's so just cringy to just be there. It's hard to watch, but he's getting what he deserved, and he knows it. And that's almost more what makes it harder. It's that idea of watching somebody get punished justly, and it's still hard to watch. It is. And the idea of God's justice, putting it in terms of, and our parents are supposed to model for us God's love for us. So of course, they're going to punish us when we deserve it, because God's going to punish us when we deserve it. And you might have heard your parents say that, that I'm doing this because I love you. I'm punishing you because I love you, or this is the best thing for you. They don't punish you because they hate you. Okay. They don't take away privileges, or, disallow dating, or, certain activities. They don't limit your screen time because they hate you. They're doing all of these things because it's best for you. It's what they truly believe is best for you. It's the same thing with Beatrice. When we meet her, she makes him feel bad, but what is she doing? She's driving him to confession, to pure contrition, and then thus to pure absolution, pure reunification and reconciliation with God. And it's all deserved, and it was successful. What she set out to do, she accomplished with him, because it did. He cried, he broke, right? He broke, he cried, he confessed, and he was absolved. And then now he's able to walk through paradise. So she is the instrument of his moral reform and religious salvation. Number two, her role in each part of the comedy. We'll just kind of review this. So in the Inferno, what did she do? What was the impetus for this whole journey? Well, she went and found Virgil in limbo, went to hell, to the gates of hell, and from heaven, she descended and found Virgil and said, hey, this guy needs your help, please. This is a dear friend of mine. And that is what starts our whole adventure. He then goes to the dark wood of error and finds Dante wandering around lost and scared, and brings him on this journey. So that is her role in the Inferno. It's her whole her visit to Virgil in limbo. In the Purgatorio, of course, we finally meet her in the last couple of cantos, and her accusation and reproaches that drive Dante to confession and repentance. That is the role. And of course, then the resulting reconciliation. So this is where that religious salvation thing comes in, right? So her role in Purgatorio is her accusation and reproaches. So you couldn't really, I would say that, I mean, that's got to be the most important part, right? And that is the hinge that kind of opens the door to heaven. If you think about it that way, nothing else could have happened. Nothing else could have, otherwise, if he had just said, wow, you're mean, I forget this, then we would have never been to paradise. He would have never reached eternal glory. I mean, what would have happened? I don't know, but I mean, what happens to us when we don't reach that point of true confession, our absolution, or our true contrition? Our absolution isn't complete at that point. So we aren't absolved. We're still walking around with sins on our soul. So what does that mean for our soul eternally? I mean, we have to think about that. So it's very important, her role of being mean, as I kind of like to think about it, but her accusation and her approaches in the purgatory. In Paradiso, remember, we've lost our previous guide. Virgil has left our side and he's returned to limbo. So now she is our guide, and her beauty, both her physical beauty and her, I guess her saintliness, her sanctity is what guides us on. And not only that, but she answers lots of questions. So, and I didn't cover that either, but we'll talk about that as well. So the power of her beauty, and we will hear him talk about it, how he looks at her, and in the beginning of each sphere, he can't bear to look at her. He's kind of like shading his eyes to look at her. But as they kind of progress through the sphere and he moves, he talks to people, he talks to blessed spirits, and he learns what needs to be learned from that sphere. And as they move onward and upward, at the end of the sphere, his ability to comprehend her beauty, her appearance, and thus God's, light shining through her and God himself, his ability grows and grows and grows. And it's kind of the same pattern in each sphere. Can't see, can't see, can't see. All right, I can tolerate it. Okay, now I can look at you. Oh, now we're moving to the next sphere, and it happens as he looks at her almost every time. He's looking at her and suddenly he finds himself in the next sphere. So yeah, so it's actually very beautiful the way it happens. So she, if you remember, is the representative of divine illumination, divine knowledge. So she is not only very bright, like a light, illuminated, but she is also divine knowledge. So it's constantly with the questions. Dante we've already seen this. He asks all kinds of questions. Well, now even more so. He is in the place. I mean, what would you do if you were in heaven and you had the opportunity to ask all these questions? I mean, isn't that like the kind of standard? Well, when you get to heaven, you can ask God why he did that. I've heard that so many times. Well, it's all those questions, that he's filed away, and he starts asking them, and he doesn't even have to verbally ask them. She can read his mind. So, you see the same sort of pattern, that you saw a little bit with Virgil too, where she kind of looks at him and smiles and sees the question in his brain. And sometimes he does verbalize it, thank goodness, for our, the reader's, credit or reader's benefit. But usually she just reads his mind and answers the question. And it's all sorts of questions. So, and some of the questions you may have had. So, and some you might never think to ask, but it's okay. We'll cover them, one by one as they come. But question, that's another whole theme of the Paradiso. Question after question after question. So all this knowledge we get as we move onward and upward. Okay, so that brings us to the structure of Paradiso. So this is page 81. So we're going to start with the first heaven, which is the heaven of the moon, because of course, like we said before, that's the first concentric, it's the first heavenly body that we see that Ptolemy would have been able to observe through his instruments of observation, and the moon. And the moon is the home of the inconstant. So inconstant, of course, meaning something that possibly wavers, is a little bit wishy-washy, mind-changing. And the inconstancy, the theme here is, and each one of the spheres is, of course, well suited to the theme or the inhabitants of that sphere. So the moon itself is quite inconstant. It changes a lot, right? It's you can't see it one night, you can see it the next night. And of course, there's pattern to it, and I understand that. And Dante knew that, Ptolemy knew that. We all know that. The point is that it's changeable. And so that is why the moon is the sphere of the inconstant, because the moon appears changeable. These souls were changeable. And that's who is in the first sphere. From the moon, the sphere of the moon, we move to Mercury. So Mercury is the seekers of honor. So these are people who possibly had some misplaced priority. They sought honor. They were good people, but their priority maybe wasn't absolutely God number one. Maybe they had this, priority of honor or glory. And if you think about this, this is almost a concession that's being offered to the ancients. We had these beautiful civilizations in the Greeks and Romans that came up, and they didn't believe in the one true God. They didn't have that information. That was before Christ came. So and a lot of them didn't even have any exposure to any of the Old Testament, happenings that were going on. So they didn't have this exposure. They weren't given that opportunity to be saved in that way. And so their primary role, their primary goal in life was to seek honor. And it's not just the Greeks and Romans. This is also a very heavy Eastern, Japanese, Chinese, right? The Asian cultures are very big on honor. So, and having that as a goal drove them to good behavior. It drove them to a morality that, while different in some parts, to the Judeo-Christian sort of morality, it drove them to do good things, to honor their mothers and fathers, to honor their laws, to honor their leaders, to build their communities, to be good to one another, to care for their children. All of these things that we sort of consider almost basic, all of these honor-seeking cultures, it almost mimicked in large part, why we do things, or I guess the results of what happens when we honor God. So seekers of honor, and it's good that there's a place in heaven for those people, because they were good people. They just didn't have the same understanding of the one true God, religiously or whatever. So that's Mercury. Number 3, the third heaven, is Venus. So Venus, of course, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. These are the amorous. So these are people who they were lovers. They loved everything. They loved God. Their love of God was prime, but possibly slightly out of priority, or something like that. And as we talk about it, you'll understand what I'm saying. But in general, those are those 3: the inconstant, the seekers of honor, and the amorous are going to be our imperfect. I hate to say that word, because everybody in heaven is made perfect, but these are the less perfect or least perfect people in heaven. And I know I've made this comparison before, and this is my favorite comparison of, that people can kind of get into their brains about heaven. Everybody's got their favorite seats in a stadium, or at an athletic event, and some people want to be right on the 50-yard line. Some people want to be high in the nosebleed section at a baseball game. Some people want to be, I don't know, at the mid-court at a basketball game, whatever it is. Same thing if you're more into like the arts. I just went to the opera a couple weeks ago. I have a place I want to sit in the opera house, and it's not always it's not usually the most expensive seats, but I always want to sit in this one place because of the perspective. I personally like the perspective from this place, and I can almost sit anywhere on that level, but I like being there. I don't feel like I get the right perspective if I'm higher, or if I'm right on the floor, even though those are, the most expensive seats, the best, because you're really close to the action. I don't really particularly like that perspective. So this is how heaven is presented. So these souls, none of them are unhappy with where they are, right? None of them are going to say, well, I mean, I'm in the sphere of Mercury, but I really should be in the sphere of Jupiter. I really like those seats better. Nobody's going to say that. That's not how it works. If you make it to God's presence, you're pretty much gold, right? It's not, nobody's going to be unhappy with where they are. Okay, they're just happy to be in the presence of God. And remember, and just because they appear in this section to us, in this sphere, everybody is right at God's feet. Again, mystery. Nobody can fathom how we can all fit at God's feet, but we're all there. So that's just to kind of give you an idea. That's nobody's unhappy with where they are. Okay, it's all justice. It's all, everybody's united with God's will. Everybody's completely satisfied with how this has gone in the end. So that brings us, those are our 3 levels of least perfection. So then we move on into the 4th heaven, which is the heaven of the sun. So again, if we're thinking about the sun, we're thinking about, guidance, I guess, central to the sky, central to the growth of plants. And of course, then, whole societies are designed around, living around the guidance of the sun. It's rising and setting, it's what it produces, what it helps us to produce. And this is not forgotten. This is not just kind of like, oh, these people are on the level of the sun. No, there's a reason that they're in this sphere. And these people are the theologians, the philosophers, and the doctors of the church. So these are the light of knowledge of the church, right? So these are people who, through their study, through their lives, and through their teaching, through sharing what they learn, and what God has inspired within them to know and to find out, by sharing these things, they have brought humanity closer to God. They have given us guidance, as the sun guides us during the day. They have given us guidance on how to live, and how to live better, and how to live more in unity with God's will. So of course, they're in the sphere of the sun, and we meet all kinds of awesome people there. I mean, I'm getting excited thinking about this as we are kind of just introducing it, and I'm remembering people who are, souls who are in these different levels. So the 5th heaven, that brings us to the 5th heaven. This is the sphere of Mars, the heaven of Mars. And of course, Mars, Aries, god of war, these are warriors of God. So these are going to be people who, fought the good fight, just literally fought the good fight. The righteous warriors. Very self-explanatory. We meet some cool people there too. So that brings us to then the 6th heaven. The 6th heaven is the heaven of Jupiter, the sphere of Jupiter. And who is Jupiter? Jupiter is Jove. Jupiter is Zeus. So he is the leader of the gods, the ruler on Mount Olympus. He is and that sphere, the sphere of Jupiter, is, of course, where we find the just and temperate ruler. So, this idea of how to rule, how to be a leader, how to be a king, how to lead humanity, this continues on. I mean, this is one thing that Dante has been just going on and on and on about from the very beginning of this work. We met all kinds of horrible, examples of popes and consuls and kings, and even like little municipal leaders, military leaders, just terrible examples of these people in hell. We had a whole valley of princes in purgatory. They were all hanging out together. That's how important they were. And now we've moved on. There's a whole sphere dedicated to just rulers, people who were excellent rulers, who should be the examples of how to lead. And again, all levels are here. So these are municipal leaders, these are political leaders, these are kings, these are popes, good popes that are here. So these are leaders. They're just and temperate leaders, rulers of all types. So that brings us to the 7th heaven, which is Saturn. And Saturn is the heaven of the contemplative. And remember, I think at this point, it's kind of interesting to kind of remember that Dante has ordered these categories in order of, of sanctity, basically, like he would consider, if you're closer to God, you're more holy than the last group. Again, it's almost irrelevant, but it's relevant. It actually is relevant. It's important because it tells you how he thinks about these things and how, how he would structure, where his priorities are, where his emphasis is in trying to tell you what's more important than something else. So the contemplatives are actually considered more holy than just and temperate rulers. So, or, warriors of God. So these are people who took vows, mostly, and they dedicated their life to a contemplative life. And I mean, it's a huge sacrifice. And I don't know if any of you are discerning or have met anyone or spoken with anyone who's discerning a religious life. The contemplative life is something that is, it's full of sacrifice, but it's so incredibly full of beauty that it is worth the sacrifice to so many, men and women who decide that they want to spend their lives contemplating God, contemplating our role on earth, and not just contemplating, but praying for. I mean, you think about the millions of people who have dedicated their lives to praying for humanity, praying for the forgiveness of our sins, praying for guidance within our societies, around the globe, praying for individual communities, praying for individuals and their families. It's incredible. It's mind-blowing to think that millions of men and women have dedicated their lives to this, given up married life, given up their families, because when you go and it's not always 100% of the time, but largely, and especially in history, when you were cloistered, that's where you were. You might write a letter to your parents, but you were giving all of that up. It's a major, major sacrifice. This is that, come follow me, drop your nets, leave your boats, and come follow me. And this is the literal answer to that, to Jesus's request for that. And so Dante places them very close to God. I mean, this is a major thing for him, and it is quite beautiful. So outside of Saturn, we reach the sphere of the fixed stars. So these people here are people who represent the triumph of Christ. We'll talk more about that. It's hard to explain right now. Outside of that sphere, we meet the ninth heaven, or we get to the ninth heaven, the ninth sphere, and this is the primum mobile. So the primum mobile, or the first movers, this is, of course, the first movers. The first creatures that were moved by God were the angels, creatures of pure spirit, no free will there, not really. They are the angel hierarchy. So all of those types, all those choirs of angels are here within this angel hierarchy, within the primum mobile, and they are ordered in their order. And there are, thrones and dominions or dominations and all of seraphim, cherubim, all of those guys, all of those angels are there. And they are basically right next to the mystic rose, or what's presented as the mystic rose. And that is a very heavy, I guess, visual kind of thing, but and we'll talk about that when we get there too. We'll kind of build on that idea as we move up into the Empyrean, which is the last sphere. The Empyrean is where we see the mystic rose, and then that's where the thrones of the blessed are. So the people that are in the thrones of the blessed are like the perfect people, the people who made the ultimate sacrifices. So we see apostles here. Blessed Virgin Mary is here in the Empyrean. Beatrice, this is where she stays. She's right here in the Empyrean. So they're all sitting right there at the feet of God, at the throne of God, and then beyond that, what is there but the infinite? It's the actual vision of God. So, once we've kind of reached that point, we're right there looking, we're in the presence of God himself. So that is the structure of the Paradiso. Yeah, I mean that pretty much is it. So, and as we go through, we'll talk more about sort of these kind of overarching themes that we have with light and color, and different questions that will come up. We'll have more of these conversations, some that are quite interesting to think about, and some that I'm going to kind of gloss over because planetary movement and some of those things might not be relevant, or even he's coming from a different perspective, so we're not going to beat those over the head. I want you guys to stay just focused on where are we, who is in this sphere, and why are they here? Why did Dante place them in this place? It's the same questions that we have covered all the way through Inferno, all the way through Purgatorio, and it's not like it's not the same like Inferno and Purgatorio, where we have, Inferno, they're getting what they deserve. They are getting punished in this way because they, the contrapasso idea, where they did this thing, and this is actually what they truly wanted. They're getting punished in this way. Same thing in Purgatorio, they're getting that retribution, that divine retribution, the penitential things that they're trying to do, patiently bear the natural consequences of their sin and all that stuff, and building virtue. There's none of that work to be done in Paradiso. It's all, about where they are. Their placement is the most relevant thing to the discussion. So who are they? What did they do in life to merit this place, this reward? And any then relevant discussion that comes up around that idea or that virtue that's really exhibited in that sphere. That's what our conversations in Paradiso are going to revolve around. So we're going to meet people we've never met. It's going to be kind of similar to Inferno and Purgatorio in that way. We're going to meet people we don't know, but we're going to meet more, I would say, more in Paradiso. We're going to meet people that we know, that these are famous people. We're going to meet Saint Francis and Saint Dominic and Saint Augustine, and holy women, like lots of women, lots of people, just lots of saints. And there will be people that we don't know, but there's going to be lots of people that we do know, more here than in the previous places, I would say. So I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the introduction here. We immediately start cantos. We're gonna next week. Is it next week? No, next week is that right? Yeah, it is next week. I know we have spring break coming up like in a couple of weeks, so I'm just trying to be mindful of that. So, and I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about that. Are you guys doing anything for spring break, and when is your spring break? Because mine is not set in stone. I don't think I'm doing anything for spring break. I think I'm going to be around. And if the week, I guess that's St. Patrick's Day week, if that week is not the week you guys have spring break, and you're going on a trip and it's going to make you miss a class, we can totally change that. So do you guys have a spring break that you need to take? Anybody?
I don't think
trying
we
to-
need to take spring break.
I'm trying to remember exactly when it is, but we are leaving.
Okay.
We're taking a trip.
Okay. So if it is not, I think I just kind of threw that in there because that's the week my kids are off of school. But again, I don't think I'm traveling, not during the week. So if you are going to miss class because you're traveling, I'd rather just move the spring break week that we're off, and then we could just continue on and we could all be present at class. So if it doesn't coordinate with that week, let me know, and we'll all talk about it. I'll talk to your moms about it. Okay. because I'd rather just kind of plug on right through to the end where, I mean, these are our final 10 classes coming up. Easter week, Easter Sunday is April 17th. I mean, this is a very late Lent and Easter season. So we are like, this is like pretty much the latest it could be with Mardi Gras with Fat Tuesday on March 1st and Ash Wednesday on March 2nd. So we're starting kind of late, but we'll hit Easter toward the very end, and we'll be well into Paradiso. And I think it always makes it very relevant and kind of exciting to be where we are at Easter season during this beautiful, joyous time, and kind of, rushing to meet God during that time, that season of Easter. It's quite beautiful. So just keep that in mind as we move through Paradise. It's Easter is around the corner. I know Lent can be difficult by design, right? It's supposed to be penitential. So maybe that will help you as you guys meditate and prepare your hearts during the Lenten season. You have this beautiful, of course, resurrection time with Easter season, but then we in our class are actually we have this additional hope that we can kind of hold in our hearts as we move in, moving through Paradiso toward the vision of God. So just to wax philosophical for a moment there. But if you guys, so next week, we've got cantos 1 through 4 of Paradiso, pages 82 through 85 in this study guide. And we'll just progress as we have been. We won't have any real review to do at the beginning of next week's class. We'll kind of jump right into Canto 1. So we'll start that. So Cantos 1 through 4 for reading, study guide, pages 82 through 85. And yeah, this is the final haul. Do you guys have any questions before we kind of break? We're done with class. This was kind of a quick class today, but any questions?
I think we're good.
Okay. If anything comes up, let me know. And again, if you guys, come up with something like you're going to be traveling or something, shoot me a message and just let me know, or have one of your moms, shoot me a message so that we can try to move the schedule around to accommodate everybody. Because I believe that that's totally doable. We can make it through the rest of these classes without missing one, and having everybody present. And this really is the most beautiful part of this whole work. So I would love to be able to all be together for the whole time. Okie dokie.
Sounds good.
Yes, ma'am.
All right,
Yes,
guys.
ma'am.
Well, I will see you then next Wednesday. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you know how to get to me. Okay.
Have a good week.
Okay, thank
you.
you. Bye.